Hi, my name is Mark Lynn, and I'm the roommate coach. You're listening to KZCH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This will be episode 22 of the Roommate Coach. The title of this one is To Have a Great Roommate, You Have to Be a Great Roommate. It's going to be kind of a recap of my core concept, which is that it is possible to have really good roommate relationships, and in order to do that, we have to kind of change our perspective from what is frequently the case. But I'll get into more of that after the introduction here. As I said, this is KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California, brought to you by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. If you want to leave me any feedback for the Roommate Coach, you can do that online at theroommatecoach.com. There should be a contact link on the homepage. And you could also leave a voicemail 24/7 at area 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. I also like to mention my motto here at the Roommate Coach, which is World Peace, one roommate at a time. Before I get started with this particular episode, just a quick recap for anyone who caught my last episode, in which I more or less promised to start my interviews with the next episode, which would now be this one. I have in fact begun reaching out to people for interviews, just a kind of a small beginning, you might say. I don't have any any real confirmed responses as yet, but I have begun the process, so I think it should be just a matter of time, and hopefully not too much time, before the actual interviews show up here on the show. So I appreciate your patience, and that's the story there. So back to this episode, which, as I said, I'm calling it To Have a Great Roommate, You Have to Be a Great Roommate. Now, the title might sound a little bit on the cute side, but it's actually pretty accurate. There's a couple of very important points that are contained within that prescription. The primary thing is that rather than staying focused on what the other people are doing, since you don't have any direct control over anyone but yourself, by looking at yourself and by turning yourself into the best roommate you can possibly be, you're putting the control where it can do some good. You're putting the effort where it can do some good. You're taking control of the situation. So that's the first half, is you just be the best roommate you can possibly be. And the second half is recognizing the bargaining power this gives you. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily fix every particular situation. Some situations might be beyond help, and that's unfortunate, but it does happen. But when you adopt this mindset, you're a lot more likely to pick roommates, and just your behavior just doesn't guarantee, but it increases your chances of picking and keeping the best possible roommate situations. It really makes sense, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. The problem that I've identified, it's not really a problem, but the weakness in my own speech and my own discussions is that while I have used that particular phrase many times, I don't know if I've spent enough time, at least here on the show, breaking down what exactly I mean by being a great roommate. Okay, well, roommate coach, that's all well and good, but how do I do that? What are the steps to take, and what are the how would I know? What are the indications that I have made myself into the best roommate I can be? Well, I will attempt to answer that in today's show, give some ideas of what I mean, and I think what is kind of commonly believed. I guess the real test is out in the world in general, would the majority of people prefer a roommate with the characteristics that I will describe here? So we'll find out. It's not so much what I think, it's what your roommates and your potential roommates think that really counts. There's another dimension to this, of course, which I will try to get to in this episode, which is not only what are the characteristics, how can you become a great roommate, but why doesn't everybody do this? That's probably the biggest issue of all. Is, in a way, it's pretty obvious that people would rather have a great roommate, a considerate and trustworthy roommate, than the other kind. So why isn't it just taken for granted? Why doesn't everybody do this? Well, there are some pretty significant answers to that question, too. I mean, if that was the case, there'd be no need for the roommate coach, and I'd be doing something else with my time right now. So first of all, the basics, which I believe I have mentioned in prior shows, but it doesn't hurt to recap. There's three basic qualities that I think are just almost go without saying. I'm talking about consideration, communication, and trust. The majority of the roommate from hell horror stories that are everywhere online, they're on YouTube, they're on forums. If you Google problem roommate or roommate from hell or roommate trouble, that type thing, you find lots and lots and lots of stories. They usually have to do with these three categories. Consideration, when you're inconsiderate, when you come barging in the middle of the night knowing your roommate has an early class, that's inconsiderate. So to be a great roommate, be considerate. Doesn't mean you have to walk on eggshells. It doesn't mean you have to just kowtow to your roommate. Just be aware of the fact that someone else lives there and they have a life and they have needs, and be considerate. Communication is kind of tied in. All of these overlap, but it's inconsiderate to not communicate. If you have plans, if you have a couple of family members coming and they're going to be staying with you in the apartment, let's say, and you don't bother to mention that to your roommate, well, that's lack of communication. So to be a great roommate, communicate. Just think of what kinds of things you would like to know, and it doesn't mean you have to keep people involved with every single tiny detail of your life, but the obvious stuff, to communicate. The third big obvious thing, and one of the big problems that roommates have, if you watch the old Judge Judy TV show, I think they're still on, they still have reruns. An awful lot of the cases that Judge Judy dealt with had to do with roommate problems, and a lot of the roommate problems have to do with honesty and integrity and living up to your obligations. Lots of times roommates will skip out without paying their share of the rent. I had a roommate many years ago, as a matter of fact, who ran up an expensive phone bill back in the day when you could have an expensive phone bill, long distance bill, and took off without paying me. So this happens all the time. So that's the prescription for that part of being a great roommate, is be honest. Keep your word. Don't make promises you're not willing to keep. And obviously, if something comes up and you're not able to do something you said you would, then guess what? You communicate. So those are the big three. Those are the basics. And I think it should just be taken for granted that those will be things you'll endeavor to do as a roommate. I mean, that's the starting point. If you don't get that far, then you have to fix that before you go any farther. But for the second part of the show today, I'd like to go beyond. There are some additional things that I think can really help in terms of being a really good roommate and for that matter, probably a really good friend as well. You're listening to The Roommate Coach on KZZH FM, 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This is episode 22 of The Roommate Coach. I'm calling it, In Order to Have a Great Roommate, You Need to Be a Great Roommate. My name is Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. You can leave feedback for me, if you like, online at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage. You could also leave a voicemail at area 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. The motto here at the Roommate Coach is World Peace, one roommate at a time. I think that's a pretty important motto. It might be unrealistic, but then again, just one at a time. So it might take a while to wind up with a truly peaceful world. It may not happen in my lifetime or yours, but it's certainly something worth shooting for. And I like to point out, too, there's a little bit of world play. If you define your world as largely where you live, and if you're able to develop a peaceful relationship with your roommate, then, in a sense, you already have world peace, because that aspect of your world is a little more peaceful. So in that way of looking at it, the motto is potentially achievable. The bumper music here on the Roommate Coach is called Rollin' at 5, and that's by Kevin MacLeod. Okay, so just to briefly recap, what I would say is the starting point for being a really great roommate is doing your best to maintain your consideration for your roommate, being a good communicator, and, of course, keeping your word, maintaining your integrity. These three issues, as I mentioned before the break, comprise apparently the vast majority of the problems that come up between roommates, at least the ones that make it to YouTube and to the various problem roommate forums and things. So I would say that if you're able to get pretty consistent in these three areas in terms of maintaining some consideration and communicating reasonably well, and of course keeping your integrity, keeping your word with your roommate or roommates, you're way ahead of the curve, and you're well on your way to being one of those roommates who will always be in great demand. And having said all that, I'd like to continue the segment here with some additional things that can be done that will help. Some are somewhat in support of the initial three, and some are just good things to do in involvement in interactions with anybody, but especially with people you're in an ongoing relationship with, such as your roommates. The first habit I will talk about is one that all by itself can go a long way to improving the rest of the relationship. And the topic is, it's a psychological term known as psychological visibility. It's kind of a fancy way of saying that we all really would like to be seen for who we really are. And for this to happen, people have to really listen to each other and really understand each other. Well, I should actually clarify that. There's more than that. It's a two-way process. It takes two things. If I'm in some kind of an involvement with you, and I want, in order for you to get to know me, let's say, two things have to happen. I have to be genuine when I talk about things that are important to me, as opposed to just talking about stuff that doesn't matter just to fill up the space, the proverbial small talk. And the other thing that has to happen is for you to genuinely listen to me and not just pretend to listen and wait until it's your turn to talk. And then, if it's to be a two-way street, which is the best way for a relationship, is for it to be reciprocal, then the same thing has to happen in the other direction. In other words, we both need to be willing to genuinely talk about things that matter to us and let ourselves be seen, and the other one needs to genuinely pay attention and listen and kind of understand that. Doesn't mean that we have to automatically approve of everything or be great fans of everything that the other person says or anything. It's just a matter of seeing each other for who we really are. A therapist I worked with years ago, whom I've mentioned a couple times, his name was Nathaniel Brandon, had a very dramatic way of making this point. He used to say that most people, I believe he did say most people, are starved for someone who will really listen to them. I have always thought that was and is an extremely important point. One byproduct of it that happens that does get in the way of the reciprocal aspect of this that I referred to, for the visibility to really work well in a roommate situation or any situation, it has to go both ways. Sometimes what can happen is if someone is really desperate for someone to listen to them, when someone actually starts listening, well, there's going to be a great temptation for the other person to keep talking, to kind of do the filibuster thing as they talk about in Congress. And this is certainly understandable, but at the same time, it does get in the way because it needs to go both ways. Now, if you like this idea and you have a roommate and you'd like to experiment and see if increasing the visibility will do some good, there are some fairly simple things you could try. Depending on the nature of your relationship, if your roommate is reasonably open to experimenting, you could just start talking about stuff. You could say something like, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we take turns? And that's important. You need to emphasize the take turns part so that you both get an opportunity. Why don't we take turns and, talk about, and then you pick a topic, something that was really important to us when we were in school, or something that we had always wanted to do, or early career goals. There's any number of things you could try. And you don't want it necessarily to be terribly, terribly personal, especially if you're first getting started, because that might be a little too much too soon. So play it by ear. And another thing you could try even without your roommate, just to sort of get in the habit, is when you're out in the world dealing with people in a store or in a restaurant, a cashier or someone, I don't know if you're supposed to say waitress anymore, but whoever brings your food to the table, your server, I guess that's the politically correct term. You could try just talking to them a little bit, just real simple things like, hey, how's the day going? It's kind of easy to get into the routine of just, I've heard it referred to as thinging each other, just dealing with each other as machines that bring us food, or machines that share our expenses and our house and whatever the function may be. But whatever you can do to open up the category of just genuinely seeing the other person as a person, and vice versa. I can't stress that enough, because it's so easy for this to become a one-sided thing. I can't begin to count the number of times in my life that's happened to me. I tend to be a good listener, and it's so easy to have a situation where that's all you do is listen. There's an old joke, of course, but enough about me. Have you read my new book? So you don't want that. So whatever you do, especially if you're doing the experiment thing, it's a good idea to emphasize. Not only is it a good idea to emphasize the reciprocity, the fact that it has to go both ways, it's probably a good idea to agree early on some kind of a signal, a non-confrontational and non-off-putting way to let the other person know that, okay, I think it's my turn now. So if you agree on that, then that tends to maintain the goodwill, which of course is always important. Now, as far as why you might resist doing something like this, or why your roommate might, or why in the world we don't do more of this as a matter of course, well, one of many psychological principles that I believe in is it's hard to give somebody else something that we still need ourselves. For a variety of reasons, many of us are a bundle of unmet needs or partially met needs. And there's an old saying about children in families, that there's an old line that says children should be seen and not heard. Unfortunately, a lot of us grew up in families and environments where that was the case, and so it's easy enough to reach adulthood with somewhat of an unmet need for visibility. And as I've said, if that's operative, if some part of you really didn't get seen enough and heard enough and listened to enough, and I think that describes a lot of us. I certainly know it described me in my early days. It's going to be kind of difficult, kind of painful when you begin to try to give that to someone else. So that's something to be aware of. It's not necessarily a showstopper, but there has to be a reason why these types of things aren't done more regularly, because the impact of doing this with others on an ongoing basis is so profound that it's just amazing to me that something this important is not more of a regular occurrence. And that's why this last few minutes here I'm talking about, this is why I think, one of the reasons why I think we don't do more of it. But it definitely can help. You're listening to The Roommate Coach. I'm Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. This is episode 22. It's called To Have a Great Roommate, You Need to Be a Great Roommate. And this is also KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. The motto here is world peace, one roommate at a time. And I think world peace is a good idea, even if it may take a while to fully attain it. And let's see what else. Contacts. Yeah, you can leave feedback for me, for the Roommate Coach, at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage. You can also leave a voicemail anytime at area 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. I mentioned the server, like the server in a restaurant, the people that at one time we called waitresses and waiters, and I imagine some people still do. But this is a good example of another point or another habit, another thing that I think can help a lot in being a really good roommate. A habit you can develop is you think of the really good server, a really good waitress, really good waiter, is the one that is there when you want them to be, when you need something or you have a question or something, and then the rest of the time they pretty much leave you alone. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, because I'm not advocating that you only talk to your roommate when you want something or when they want something. That's not the point. But the point is one of space and privacy. As Heinlein said, privacy and company are both essential, and you can drive someone crazy by depriving them of either. And the other thing, too, is that to some extent, just having a roommate could be considered by some, and this is a statement that I know I'll object to before I even say it, because it's not literally true, but in some ways, having a roommate can be seen as a compromise, because, I mean, let's face it, the big reason why we generally look into having a roommate is to save money most of the time, although more and more nowadays we're hearing about the importance of connections and community, which I totally agree with. That's one of my points as well. But to make the most of the situation, the best of both worlds is when you have a roommate where you can, in fact, share the expenses and do the obvious things, and at the same time still have your privacy. And obviously the same thing working in the other direction. So in order for that to happen, you need to be aware of the issue, and all of these things work together. The more you're aware of your roommate as a person, the more tuned in you're likely to be to his or her needs in this regard. Some people want and need more autonomy, more privacy, more space than others. So it helps if you have kind of a sense of just where your roommate's at on that scale, and vice versa. And of course, there's no reason why you can't just talk about it. I mean, that's kind of a good way to let people know what's important to you and find out what's important to them. And related to this same issue, which I guess I'm calling it the privacy versus company issue, the autonomy, another aspect of it is accepting someone else's decisions. If there's one thing that really drives me crazy about our culture as seen in media, on TV shows and movies and stuff, is how it seems like we are constantly trying to stick our nose in other people's business and do their thinking for them. And yeah, it's a good idea if you have an opinion. If you have a friend that you think is on the verge of screwing up, there's nothing wrong with letting them know. But at some point, I really think that for things to continue working well between any two people, or two or more people, I guess I should say, that are dealing with each other on a regular basis, that's obviously the roommate situation, is they need to know when to just kind of butt out and accepting each other's decisions and not trying to make their business your business unless they specifically ask you to. That's a different story entirely. But to me, this is part of the autonomy issue and part of the privacy versus company. Okay, I've got a couple more here on my list, and I don't think I have enough time left in this show. I try to keep these to about a half an hour, which I'm approaching now. There's not enough time left to really do them justice, so I'll just mention them very briefly and then go into more detail maybe in the next show. And it's possible that I'll have an interview in my next show too, now that I've begun looking. But a couple more really good things to bring to the table to be a good roommate, things to develop. One is tolerance. That's a really, really good idea to maintain some tolerance for each other. Now, this doesn't mean being a doormat, doesn't mean letting the other person walk on you. That's why I'd like to elaborate and go into more detail and when time permits, probably in the next show or soon. And then another big topic, which is super important, not only for roommates, but almost anywhere in life. And it's something that I guess one way to summarize it would be just to simply admit when you're wrong. Now, we have a lot of reasons, a lot of life experience, and a lot of very powerful reasons to do the exact opposite, which I fully understand. I live here too, and I'm not pretending to be not affected by all this stuff. I've certainly had my share of issues. But it's one of those personal skills that is so much worth cultivating. I really can't say enough about it. And it doesn't mean being self-effacing or running yourself down or anything like that. It just means that if you do in fact make a mistake, then you own up to it. It just saves so much time, and it can make an enormous difference in any relationship, especially with roommates. But I'll go into more detail in a coming episode, probably in the next one. So that's going to be it for this episode. This has been episode 22 of The Roommate Coach. I'm Mark Lynn. I'm the Roommate Coach. The episode has been called To Have a Great Roommate, You Need to Be a Great Roommate. And this has been playing on KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County, California by Access Humboldt, and they can be reached at accesshumboldt.net. As I said, I'm Mark Lynn. You can leave feedback for me for The Roommate Coach at theroommatecoach.com using the contact link on the homepage. And you can leave feedback at area 707-362-8000 anytime, 707-362-8000. The motto here is World Peace, one roommate at a time. And I've really enjoyed talking to you about these things, and I hope you find some of them helpful. That's why I give the contact information. And if you do or if you don't, if you have any suggestions for improvement, let me know. But anyway, I look forward to talking to you again real soon, and thank you so much for listening. So long for now.